Hey, Christine, thanks for joining. I'm super excited to be chatting with you today. It looks like you're sitting in the cloud, the Toyota Mirage, and I'm excited to chat with you about it. I know you've had it for almost a decade and you're getting ready to sell it. So, hey, welcome to the show and thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, in my constant pursuit of vintage and classic RVs and RVs of all categories, pumped to talk to you about this gym that you've built. So I guess to start, and I'll put links for people that are watching this so they can see the full listing here of what Christine's sitting in. But I'd love to hear, like, how did you first acquire this rig? Like, give me the background. Talk to me about it a little bit.
Uh, well, I bought it about 10 years ago, maybe a little less. So 11 to 12 years ago, I decided that I wanted something the next step up in size from my Volkswagen. I have a 70 Volkswagen Westphalia, and it's almost as fast as your non-self-propelled lawnmower. So
Not a lot of
I
horsepower.
started looking at these Toyotas. And I spent an entire year watching all the listings for Chinooks, Bandits, and Mirages. And Bandits, Bandits are the most rare. Mirages were extremely rare to show up, only one every 6 months or so. Chinooks show up on a somewhat regular basis, but I was using these national searches that would mine all of the Craigslist stuff and all the Auto Trader and everything. So one day when I should have been working, hope my boss isn't watching this, I should have been working and I was looking at car ads and this, it looked pretty good in the ad. Mirage, that was only about 25 miles from my house, came up. So the little voices in my head said that I had to have this extremely rare, bizarre-looking thing that it reminds me of the vehicles in that old Woody Allen movie Sleeper,
Oh yeah, oh
sort
yeah.
of like retro futuristic. So I went over and I bought it from this guy, and he had been using it as transport for Harley Davidson motorcycles, and he was kind of beating the shit out of it. And he had taken all of he had all but one of the original fiberglass furniture pieces, but they were all in a pile, and some of them were cut in half. And I'm kind of cringing, but I thought, well, it really I just will wash it and put it back together. It doesn't really need much. And so that's how that started. That's how I brought home what turned out to be a gigantic mold sponge.
Well, I mean, you've turned it into this. I saw somebody comment, I think it was on one of the Instagram posts promoting it for sale. Someone said, "What's the miles per gallon to Mars?" So I think you've, which made me laugh. It's one of those. It's like everyone wants to know That's the thing with the Toyota Motorhomes is like they get great miles per gallon and you can park them anywhere. That's the selling point. And so
Yeah.
I've seen that question a million times. And then people argue. Well, 14, the power up the hill. There's always argument with the miles per gallon. And she asked, what was the miles per gallon to Mars? And it kind of made me think on like the Mirage with the shell and kind of that futuristic spaceship look. And then you vibed it out in the interior kind of retro mod almost. So yeah, the work you've done that's been crazy. I'm curious, like, tell me about that process, like from where you got it, guy hauling Harleys in it to like where it is today, which to me is like so bespoke and so like kind of like your personality mixed with like what I'd want out of a 17-foot, something I could park anywhere.
Uh, well, to address the miles per gallon, somewhere in the mid to upper teens, all depending. The custom calibrated odometer is custom. uh, 14 to 17, depending on the headwinds and stuff like that.
Right.
And so when I got it home, I started putting it together and I noticed it ran okay. Actually, I could have just kept on driving it, but it had a bit of a moldy smell and I couldn't let that go. So I took some pieces apart and then I took some more pieces apart. And then at some point I had everything completely out of the front in the cab, all the seats, the padding, the dashboard, the vents and everything. And I was just up to the firewall, and I still kept smelling mold. And I'd be sitting up there. I spent a few months doing this because of my meticulousness. I would be sitting up there in the front thinking, I've got the last thing off. There's got to be no more mold. And then I would still smell mold. And one day there was literally nothing left. And where the f- is this mold coming from? Like, it's my shoes. so at that point, like, okay, we're fixed. So I basically had it down, completely gutted. Any little bits of crusty rust, I treated them with this Pour 15 stuff, which I recommend. If you follow the instructions and your rust isn't too deadly, that'll really slow it down. Rustoleum is a lost cause, but the POR 15, I'm not getting paid for this. That
But
stuff.
about to say, when I get a sponsorship, Rustoleum's gonna want me to edit that out. But hey, too bad.
Well, Rustoleum's okay if you put it over Pour 15.
Yeah.
So I was, I put it back together. Every single piece was cleaned and restored. I, cleaned out on the interior, I cleaned out the heat, like the heater core for the heating system. I repainted all of the trim black because I don't like brown. On the interior of the cab, I ended up cutting out, if you've seen this, in the write-up, I cut out the interior layer of fiberglass and took out the interior layer of the fiberglass on the ceiling and the what's called the honeycomb paperboard that was the sandwich layer, and that was nasty. It turns out that water will come in from leaks and then it will stay inside. So I had to remove that layer in order to really get rid of the mold, which I finally vanquished. I think that was like 7 years worth of work. I would come in here in the winter and spray it with straight bleach, and it would be clean. Before I did that, and then the mold would be back within a few months. So
Well,
I
it's
just could
worth
not let that
noting.
go.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, I just couldn't let that one go. So I just kept going until I finally got to the bottom of it. Unless one of these has lived in a desert, I would be extremely skeptical of what's in between the two layers of fiberglass on them. People say fiberglass can't leak, but there's two places where it can, and one is anywhere you put a hole in it, and two is that the kind of fiberglass construction they used was called sprayed chop, and it's like spraying spackle, and it was a bit porous. It was the perfect substrate for dirt and mold. Um,
Yeah, it's
so
worth noting. I was just gonna
yeah,
say it's worth noting you're in Portland, so I don't know
oh
if
yeah,
people are familiar with Portland. It rains a little. I used to live there. It rains a little bit every once in a while, or actually constantly. So yeah, you're dealing with that. So yeah, I can imagine it's been a constant battle.
yeah. I learned a lot of things about fiberglass work and mold mitigation. So there's that. But once I finally vanquished the mold, I I put the interior back together and painted it all these goofy colors. And some of the colors are not complete because the pandemic hit and the paint literally is no longer produced. So the inside is clean and functional. And as far as the exterior, I was trying to just buff out the original gel coat, the exterior paint, and it was clear that wasn't going to work. So I eventually, and I don't know what mood I was in that year, but I took it to a shop and paid real money to have the exterior cleaned up and painted. And I went through the mechanics, and with mechanics, I could do some of this stuff, but I just sort of have a problem getting around to things, and some of it's too heavy. But I had the suspensions fixed, the redone, the tires are redone. I swapped a 5-speed transmission in, because if you've driven one of these with a 4-speed, when you get over about 45 miles an hour, the engine is already revving so fast, and it's painful to drive it over about 50 miles an hour. So that fifth gear makes an enormous difference. And I had the engine souped up and got about 20% more power out of it. So in normal traffic, it can keep up okay. Going up a hill, it's big and a bit slow, but it's not as slow as the Volkswagen.
Yeah, well, I don't know what's much slower than those old forward control VW buses. They're and those don't. I'm out in Arizona now. Like we were talking about, those don't do well out here because they're air cooled. But
Oh, yeah.
and for people who are listening or watching, well, because you've done a great. The exterior paint's amazing on this. Like as far as the year. It looks really good, so it's obvious the money you put into it. It shows from your pictures, and you have great pictures, but it's not like they're super professional shot photos where we're doing Adobe Photoshop on them. That's what the paint looks like, and it looks great, and the interior looks great
Oh,
too.
yeah.
So I'll put
Thanks.
all that in the down below so people can click through and check that out because it's worth getting the full view of it and the build that you've done.
We
Yeah,
need
there's
to
a look.
highlight the shag rug on the ceiling because that's probably the most important upgrade.
Yes, I love the
People
shag
have
rug. It's
strong
amazing.
opinions about it, but um, that that is sustainably, humanely raised Muppet there. I mean, that there's nothing cruel about this shag. He's
From we're a similar generation, so I when I grew up, I remember going into houses that still had shag carpet in it. So yeah, it gives me good vibes of being a kid and laying my face on the shag carpet. So I actually love it. Yeah, people do have either people love it or they don't love it. So I
People have
I
very
feel you.
specific opinions about the colors. 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed like it, and one that I never asked their opinion hates it.
Yeah, unsolicited advice. Come on,
There's
I
a
don't, I
lot,
don't care
yeah.
if you don't. This is not a Class A diesel pusher. This is a snapshot in time, and that's why these things are special. So you talked about this a little bit. You were talking about driving it a little bit, and there's videos, and I'll put those links in as well of you driving around PDX and it up on a dyno, which is the coolest thing ever for me, by the way. Someone who's a gearhead to
Oh,
see
love
what
it.
I've never seen. I know it's been done before, but I've never seen a video of one of these on a dyno, so it's super cool to see. But I'm curious. Give me the because a lot of people that are new and even people who've owned like early '90s Winnebago Warriors and stuff, they don't know what it's like to drive an older shorty. What's it like to drive? What's it like to take out and get out of the city, or just around town? What is the vibe like? How does it drive? Is it straight? That kind of thing.
Well, I always have to be real careful getting out of my narrow-ish driveway, and the top is wider than the the front where the engine is. So you have to be careful when you're in confined spaces. But once I get out of the driveway and I'm driving down the road, it literally just feels like a little manual Toyota 4-cylinder. I used to have a 93 Toyota pickup. You remember the kind that it had crank windows and didn't come with a bumper?
Bumper was an extra
Yeah, it was like
factory add-on.
$200
Yeah.
extra. Uh, it's just like driving a little pickup truck. In heavy wind, of course, you get more wind and or more pushed around because of the size, but because of how curved it is, it's not as probably not as bad as one of the bigger Winnebagos or a Dolphin. And with the new suspension and steering components, it drives tight. I'm going to decide I don't want to sell it, but it drives like a dream. When I get in this thing, I'm like in my happy place. Uh,
That's the funny part is I bring people on to interview them about their rigs they're selling, and then they're talking about it so much they get in this, especially with what you've done. You've had this thing for a decade. Yeah, you're gonna talk yourself into not selling it. But yeah, I mean,
yeah.
someone who's been following this space for a decade. I've been following this space about as long as you've owned it. And I've owned them before, but as far as following it, meaning like running a classifieds and like watching basically everyone that goes up for sale, when I saw yours pop up and I saw your pictures, I was like, oh, okay, this one's because there's even in the Toyota space, there's people who buy and flip, there's people who kind of beat them up. It's everything, right? And I saw yours and I go, oh, this is one where there's someone who like is a little bit of a gearhead, a little bit of a DIY person, has a flair for the artistic. You know, so I sensed everything before I even talked to you about. I was like, I got to have you on and talk about this build, you know. And you obviously
Thanks.
put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and it shows. And I think for people who are going to buy something like this, they need to go, in my opinion, you tell me what you think. They need to go in understanding like what they're buying. Like this is not a Jayco. This is not a Sprinter camper. This is a vintage timepiece, but you get all the positives with some of the burden of owning something like that. And you got to put the energy into it to make it work.
Oh yeah. Well, I've always enjoyed driving around and living in my little hermit crab shell campers, but I always thought I was maybe a little bit cooler than someone who just buys the basic Winnebago. So, I mean, this is about as weird as it gets, and it is at the moment it's all fixed up, so it drives fine. It's ancient, so there's always some little thing that happens, but those mostly worked through. Um, it's not super fast, but I'm not in a hurry. Everyone likes to talk about it, and usually I'm game for that. Usually it's fun. Once in a while, I just don't feel like being bothered, but I still feel obligated to be polite.
What type of
Ish.
reactions? So when you stop somewhere, I mean, I know these, so I would be like, oh my God, what year's your Mirage? Like that's me. But even people who've seen Toyota motorhomes before, they're going to be confused by this. Most people, I would imagine. So like, what kind of reactions have you got? Like, what's your top couple reactions you got from people out and about?
Number one, without exception, a guy runs over to me and says, "This is custom. You didn't do this." No, well, uh, it came this way from a factory, but yeah, the colors and stuff, I kind of I'm guilty. And another one, mostly people want to come over and they want to admire it. I love it when the Toyota RV people come over and they know what they're looking at, which happens
Mhm.
sometimes. And I have a couple other friends that have Dolphins and Warriors, and that's the most fun because then it's almost like being at a car show where everybody already
Yeah.
knows what they're looking at, and they just want to see what you've done. And mostly it's just lots of people wanting to admire it, and that's usually fun. Once in a
Yeah.
while, yeah, once in a while, like I was at a Walmart in Idaho, and I was mobbed, and I really just wanted to get out of there.
That's funny. I mean, it it's one of those things like I love Toyota motorhomes. There's a special place in my heart, and I've had a bunch of different campers, and I've had tons of cars and stuff. And I think the one thing is like it's a different animal. Like from my personal opinion, if you drive a 35-foot or 45-foot even Class A, they're apartments on wheels. They're amazing. They're awesome, but they're unless you have something really interesting, they're pretty much a dime a dozen, and they're not as there's not a cool factor. And by the way, if you ever driven one of those on narrow roads, they are quite scary. And what's really cool about the Toyota motorhome, especially a shorty like an 18-foot Sun Raider or like your 17-footer, they're just so mobile and they're so cool, and obviously you're not gonna have the same space. But yeah, I think that if you love them, if you love that kind of style and you want the mobility, then to me, like what it provides, it's really second to none from a vintage perspective, right? You can get a more modern camper if you want, but if you want the vintage thing, has a mobility, has a durability, like this is what you buy.
Yeah, well, it does a great job of being the next size up from a Volkswagen Westie. This one I might even say is two sizes up because the upper part is so wide. Unlike the pop ups that pop straight up, this one just is the next size up from that. And I've always thought about I could shoehorn a little bathroom in here so it would really be self-contained, but I just haven't. I haven't done that.
How
Maybe the
tall?
person wants to.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. There's obviously enough space in there in the corner. Did I was going to ask you? I don't know if I can't remember if it's in your write up or not. How tall is the height of the interior of those? I can't remember off the top of my head. Can you stand up without ducking?
Well, I can, but I'm like 5'2", according to me. It's about 6 feet.
Okay, that's what I
So
thought.
all but all but the really tall people can stand up in here. The upper bunk is about 75 inches side to side and is reasonable for one person. It'd be okay for two adults if you're pretty small. The lower bunk is fairly short. Wouldn't put anyone over about 5'4" or 5'5" on it. Um, but as far as walking around, it's enough for me. I could even jump and not hit my head.
We just got to work on your vertical, then we'll get you hitting your head. All right.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your Westie, and which I've seen pictures of, which is super cool, by the way, too. I love those.
Thanks.
Old bay window buses are fun. Have you owned anything else? Is it just been the Mirage and the Westie, or have you had other campers or other motorized RVs of any kind?
I haven't owned other campers. I also had a biodiesel phase in which I have owned three or four diesel cars and attempted to put fry oil in them because that seems like a good idea.
You have VW Rabbit pickup? You have one of those that you converted
I
over?
had a VW, an '84 VW Rabbit hatchback,
Hatchback, yeah. The
and
caddies.
yeesh. Now I have an electric car, so my fuel for most daily things is even cheaper than fry oil.
Yeah, that's the way it's going. All right, cool. And then I guess lastly, just, and I appreciate you, if you have anything else to add, please jump in. But I was just curious, like, why are you selling it after 10 years? What's the, you just mentioned you might keep it now, as, passingly,
Yeah.
but why are you looking to move on? What's the reason?
Well, I've put a lot into this, but I don't use it as much as I thought. When I bought it, I was still fairly squarely in my youth, I think, and middle age sneaked up. I thought I would spend time living on the road and bumming around Alaska, and well, I have lots of ideas. So I'd like to send it to another home where it can get more love. I also want some space because I have some old sailboats that I want to restore. So I kind of go from one project to the next. You can look for me probably in a year or two selling some nicely restored sailboats for less than I put into them.
I don't
Because
have a
that's kind of
website
how I,
for boats yet, but maybe by then.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't that the thing though? I think, with any of these luxury vehicles, you always end up putting more into it than what you get out. Unfortunately, that's kind of the way with,
I
but it's,
view it as I view it as historical preservation. I try to make myself feel better by at least reminding myself that it's something that's fairly unique and will probably hold some value for a long time as long as it stays in decent condition. That and other rationalizations.
yes.
Yeah.
I have too many of those vintage guitars and old motorcycles, and I'm down to 4 vehicles though now. So we're good. And I don't have an RV right
Oh,
now,
yeah.
which is weird. I'm the RV guy and I don't have an RV, but I'm looking for the next one. So
Well, this is a really nice RV.
I know my wife will only allow me now to have something that has enough space for me and the 2 kids. And, so I think we need something a little bit bigger. But when I was a solopreneur driving around and living in Portland, I had a Dolphin that wasn't that much bigger than that. So that would have been perfect for me. But yeah, I'm like you. I've middle age has crept up on me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also down to 4 cars. A year or two back, I was up to 7, and I get this Chevette that I was going to downsize to, but I was also going to drive that in the Gambler 500, if you're familiar with that, which
No, what's
beats the
that?
shit out of cars. And I basically determined that my little Chevette was worthy of preservation, and I also couldn't destroy that one. I mean, this one's also been invited to go to the Gambler 500. Go ahead and at some point Google that group.
Google it. Okay.
It's nutty group that buys cars for $500 or less and basically gambles by driving them in off-road rallies.
I have many things to Google now. That'll be on my list. Gambler 500. Interesting. Okay. I have to have those guys on the show. Well,
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
Christine, anything else that you want to leave the audience with before they go? Obviously, for people that are watching or listening, we'll put all the notes where they can check out and just let me give everybody the full. So what you're sitting in and what you're selling right now. 1984 Toyota Mirage, for sale right now located in Portland, Oregon. And you said you are willing to maybe possibly deliver. Is that one thing you're open to doing?
Well, yes. I mean, within the West Coast area.
Okay,
So
cool. And so, yeah, again, very cool rig and super unique. I'll put all the links for everybody so they can check that out. And then you have of course, your contact information is available in there as well. But before we go, anything to leave the people with?
when you buy an old camper, use it more than I used mine. And also wear clean shoes when you're trying to find where the mold is.
That's perfect, Christine. I appreciate you. And thanks again.
Thank you.